Hey everybody, welcome back to Ready Steady Play. This is the setup and rules video for The Godfather, Corleone's Empire. The Godfather, Corleone's Empire is a 2 to 5 player game from Cool Mini or Not, designed by the eminent Eric Lang. It's a primarily a territory control game that also consists of action selection and set collection. In this video, I'll talk about the components you'll find in the box, the subtle differences between setting up the game for 2, 3, 4, or 5 players, and then I'll jump straight into the rules and how to play the game. The first thing you'll find when you open the box is, of course, the rule book. But you don't need to worry too much about that. Obviously, it's going to be a helpful reference when you play the game. You've also got on the back a helpful rules summary that's going to shortlist everything in the game. It says on the box that the game takes 60 to 90 minutes. I'd say that's pretty accurate. I'd say you're looking at about half an hour per player, give or take 10 to 15 minutes. The first thing you find when you open the box is, of course, this map of New York. The map is divided into 7 sections from Wall Street, Brooklyn, Upper East Side, Queens, Upper West Side, Midtown, and Chelsea. These numbers are important because during the course of the game, new buildings are going to be added to the city, which allow you to take more actions and stuff. More on that later. But these buildings will get progressively better as they come out. And of course, you'll find the better buildings in the higher numbered areas. With more players, there'll be more buildings. And that means that as the player count increases, you'll find more powerful buildings in the higher numbered areas. Whereas in a game with just fewer players, the most powerful buildings will be hovering around the mid-numbered areas. These numbers also indicate the order in which the territories are resolved during the turf war phase of the game, which can be really important in a game with more players where you've got more territory chits out on the board and you've run out and you're moving your chits around. What am I talking about? Well, I'll explain more about that as we get into the turn order. But first, let's have a look at what else is in the box. This might be our most important part of the box. These are the models that represent the different families we'll be using as we play the game. So this is the infamous horse's head. This acts as a first player token. The first player begins each round and it also breaks certain ties, so that's very important. You can take this by selecting a certain action during the course of each round. This is a police car. This marks what phase we're in each round. This is Don Corleone, who marks which round we're in. Although actually in this game they're called acts. These are the neutral characters. We've got a policeman here. We've got a union boss. And we've got the mayor of New York. Then we've got the 5 families. Each player will have a family. Each family consists of 3 family members and 3 thugs. We've got the Maruzos. We've got the Cacamos, the Matarazzo, the Vitali, and the Pizzino. By way of an example, I'll show you the Vitali family. Here we've got Gianni Vitali. He's the Don. Every family has a Don, and these are all unique models for each family in the box. Then we've got Sofia Vitali. She's the consigliere of the Vitali family, which is sort of like the advisor. We've got Tancredi Vitali, and he's the heir of the Vitali family. And then we've got 3 Vitali thugs. There they are. The thug models are not unique. They're all 3 of them the same, and they're actually the same for all the families as well. Each family also has a stack of chits associated with it, which will match its color. These will be used to mark territory during the course of the game. Each family has a suitcase. Here's the Vitali's suitcase from Canada. And they've got player numbers marked on the side here so that you know which player they're for. And they're also color-coded there, red. You'll also find in the box a stack of blue buildings, a stack of red buildings, these job cards. We've also got these neutral character cards. There's one set for each act for the first 3 acts. There's no set for the 4th act, as no one is hired in the 4th act. Finally, we've got money. 3 different stacks of money in varying denominations. We've also got these drugs, laundered money, booze, and weapons. These are all acting as resources which we'll collect throughout the game and spend to carry out jobs. More on that later. Setting up the board is dead easy. All you have to do is give every player a set of mobsters. That's their thugs and their family members. Note that in a 2-player game, they'll get all three thug models, but in a game with more than 2 players, they only get 2 thug models, so one will be returned to the box, not to be used in this particular game. Once everybody's got their family members and their thugs, their mob, then they'll get a stack of territory chits like this one. They'll also get a luggage, a suitcase matching their player color or their mob, their family color as well. You can also determine the first player at this point. That's the person who last watched The Godfather, or you can determine it however you normally do that. Once you've done that, you can set up your board. The board goes in the middle of the table, easy access for everybody involved. Don Corleone goes down on Act 1 of the Act Tracker. Our little police car goes down on Phase 1 of the round tracker here. And our 3 neutral figures go in easy accessible order. Then we take our money and we create a money pool with the different denominations. We also create a pool of resources with the different resources in it. Finally, we shuffle our jobs and put them in a face-down deck. We shuffle our blue building tiles. They go in a face-down deck. Red ones also go in a face-down deck. We've got our hired characters over here in their Act 1, 2, and 3 piles. We're ready to start dealing out the cards for the game. So the first thing you'll notice is that we have these building spaces here on the board. These are for these buildings here that are going to come out randomly. Now, the number of buildings you put out depends on the number of players you have in your game. For example, you can see this space in Wall Street says starts with a business with 4+ players. Well, we've got 3 players, so we wouldn't put out a building here. However, if we had more than 3, we would put out a building. If we had 5 players, we'd actually start with 3 buildings in all of these spaces here. As indicated earlier, the first 3 territories on the board. Then we're going to put out jobs. Note that, again, the jobs are limited by the number of players or affected by the number of players. So here we've got spaces for 2 jobs. Those will go out no matter how many players they are. And then we've got 3+ players here and 5 players here. So if we have 3 or 4 players, we'll put out a 3rd job. And if we have 5 players, we'll put out a 4th job. Now, these jobs are things that can be completed for Don Corleone. They're worth victory points at the end of the game. They also give you useful abilities during the course of the game. And this represents a communal pool of jobs that everyone will be able to have access to and complete during the course of the game. But we'll also have jobs in our hand that we can complete for Don Corleone later. The next thing we're going to do is put out ally cards equal to the number of players -1. So we'll shuffle our Act 1 allies, and we'll put out 1 ally for 1 player, 2 allies for 3 players, and going all the way up to 4 allies for 5 players. You won't need the Act 1 allies again for this game, so you can just put them face down there on the board, out of the way. Finally, everybody gets a hand of cards. In their hand of cards, they're going to get $1, $2, $3, and 2 random jobs off the job deck. And they'll also take their consigliere and put their consigliere here on the Act 2 marker. Everyone will also take their heir model and put their heir on the Act 4 marker. I know this is wrong. So once everybody's set up and they've got their hand of 5 cards, then the game is ready to begin. The objective of the Godfather game is to accumulate the most money. And the way in which we accumulate money is by capturing territory on the board and hiding money away in our little metal suitcases. The point is that Don Corleone won't last forever, and when he falls, we want to be in the best position of all the families to take over the city and take over the family businesses. The game takes place over the course of 5 phases. The first phase is the placement of a new building. In order to determine what building we place, we check the act structure here. You can see in the first 2 acts we put down a blue building, and in the second 2 acts we put down a red building. So then what we'll do is we'll look across the board for the territory of the lowest number that has an empty building slot. In the case of a 2 or 3 player game, this will be Wall Street, but in a case of a game with 4 players, it'll be Brooklyn, and in a case of 5 players, it'll actually be Queens. So we'll take the first tile from the top of the blue deck and put that out in the first applicable slot. That's the open new business phase. The next phase is called family business, and this is the phase in which basically the entire game takes place. This is where we're going to use actions to place models on the board and all that kind of stuff. So I'll go into the details of this in just a minute. This phase is the turf war phase. This is where we sort of resolve the territory control aspects of the game. This is the bribery phase. This is the phase in which we're going to use money to bribe neutral officials to acquire those ally cards. And finally, this is the cleanup phase, also called Tribute to the Dawn, in which we pay our tribute to Don Corleone and discard cards from our hand. The number of cards you can hold in your hand during this phase is indicated by the act. You can see here in Act 4 you can only have 2, but in Act 1 you can have 5. On a player's turn, there are 4 things he can do. He can place a family member, he can place a thug, he can play a job from his hand, or he can play an ally card. The player cannot pass, so they must do one of these 4 things. Playing a family member or a thug requires you to play one of your models here to the board. So in a 3 or more player game, you'll start the game with 3 members of your family. In a 2-player game, you'll have 4. You will unlock more family members as the game progresses through the acts and these figures become available. However, at the beginning of the game, you should only have 3 or 4. When you've placed all of these figures, and you have no figures left available to place, your turn for the family business immediately ends, and you can take no further actions. It doesn't matter if you have jobs you can play from your hand, ally cards you could have played from your hand. If you have no figures that you can place on the board, then your turn is over and you must end your family business turn. And when you pass, you're out and you can take no further actions. So these are your thugs, and they represent the foot soldiers of your mob. When you place a thug, you place him on one of the square spaces on any of the buildings on the board. If we were to play our thug here to Wall Street, we can play him here in the barber shop, or we could also place him here in the Stardust room. When our thug is placed on a building, he shakes down the front of that building, and we get to take an action associated with the symbol here on the side. Now, in the case of the Stardust room, we simply gain $3 and put it in our hand. In the case of the barber shop, we actually get a job from Don Corleone. It's worth noting that when you shake down the front of a tile, you don't get anything associated with these symbols on the back. These are associated with shaking down the back of the building, which is something for the family members. When you gain a job card from shaking down, say, the barber shop, for example, you draw 2, You choose the one you want to keep, and you discard the other to a face-up discard pile. The remaining one goes in your hand. Placing family members is a bit different. Family members have circular bases, which means they can't actually be placed in these square spots on buildings. Family members are placed in circular spaces on the board here, between different territories. When a family member is placed on a circular space like this, they shake down all of the businesses, the backs of all of the businesses in adjacent territories. In this case, placing the figure here would allow you to take this action here on the gun dealership. Note that you take the one on the back. You would also take the action at the back of the Stardust Room, the barbershop, and the accounting office. It's also worth noting that some spaces are only available in games of a certain size. For example, this space is available in all games, but this space is only available in games with 3 or more players. I won't go through all of the actions that the player placing this guy gets to do, but I will talk briefly about these two. This one allows the player to take a gun resource here, so they'll draw this resource card from the gun deck and put it into their hands. It's worth noting that these decks of resources are finite, so when they run out, they're simply exhausted until a player spends some guns and returns it to the supply pile. This symbol here allows you to put one card from your hand into your suitcase. Note that the card must be money, therefore you'll be required to reveal it from your hand there, show all of the other players what it is, and then hide it in your suitcase. The next action is complete a job. When you're completing a job for Don Corleone, you can either complete a job from your hand, or you can complete a job from the board. When you're doing that, you take the job from your hand. You also pay the appropriate resource cost with the resources from your hand. The resource costs are listed here on the side of the card. So here we see I've played the card Can't Refuse. The price of the card is here, so I would have to discard one alcohol card back to the supply in order to play this. Then what happens is 2 things will happen. One, an ability will trigger here, and the card text will tell you what that is. Secondly, money down here. You'll take this money and add it to your hand. It's worth noting that you can do this in any order. You can take the money and add it to your hand first, and then carry out the action. This one says, other players discard a card. You may choose one and suitcase it. Now that's relevant because you might want to suitcase this $3. So you can draw that first and put it in the suitcase if you want. When you complete a job, you also take the job card and put it in your suitcase. The last thing you can do is play an ally card from your hand. You won't be able to do this on the first act because nobody will have any allies yet. But once you've got an ally card in your hand, you can play that as an action on your turn. Some ally cards allow you to place down these neutral figurines here on the board, and I'll talk a bit more about them later on. Some ally cards just allow you to do things, like this small-time rookie says for each turf you control, add $1 to your suitcase. So when you play him, you would simply add $1 to your suitcase for each turf you control. I'll explain about turf control during my explanation of the Turf Wars phase. The Union Boss is one ally that might come up. It says here on the card, move the Union Boss to an unoccupied business thug space. Shake down the front of that business like a thug. It's worth noting that the Union Boss has a square base, and so he can be placed in buildings just like a thug. The Mayor card reads, move the Mayor to an unoccupied family member space. Shake down the back of all businesses in adjacent turfs like a family member. The Mayor has a circular base just like family members, allowing him to be placed on those family member spaces. We've also got the Police Chief here, and his card reads, move the Police Chief to a turf, move any one figure out of that turf to any other space, and they get no ability when that happens. This is allowing you to leverage territory control. The policeman who shows up in Act 2 says, move the Police Chief to a turf, gun down one player figure in that turf. The Police Chief is a unique model in the sense that he's the only model in the game that's placed inside a turf like this, and not in a building space or in a family member space. When a policeman is placed in a turf, you're allowed to gun down an enemy figure. What does that mean? Well, any figure on the board can be gunned down. When a figure is gunned down, they're removed from the board. Note that this doesn't affect the action which has already been taken by the player when he or she placed the figure, but as we'll see later, this can severely impact territory control. When a figure is gunned down, place it face down in the Hudson River. So players will alternate taking one of those 4 actions, going round and round the table until nobody has any family members left to place on the board and everybody's being forced to pass. When that happens, our little police car moves into the turf wars phase. So I've set up the board here to resemble what it might look like after the end of the first family business phase. As you can see, a couple of players have lost a couple of thugs who've been gunned down. They're face down in the Hudson River. Family members are out on the board, and the thugs are also in different buildings, having taken different actions. So, turf war is the territory control aspect of the game. And what we're going to do is count up how many people are in each space, and whoever controls the majority is the winner. In this case of Wall Street, we've got 1 green and 1 blue, because these are both counting as in the territory. Thug is in the territory. The family member is adjacent to the territory, but this means he counts as being in the territory. So here we've got 1 for 1, which means nobody wins. Then we move over to Brooklyn, continuing in numerical order. In Brooklyn, the red player has 2. He's got a thug in the Korean laundry and a family member here. This makes him the clear winner of Brooklyn. So he takes one of his territory control chits and just puts it down here on this marker. Over in the Upper East Side, blue's the winner. Over here in Queens, red's the winner. Nobody wins the Upper West Side. Nobody wins Chelsea or Midtown. Because once again, here we've got a 3-way draw, and here we've got a draw. It is worth noting that neutral figures can also contest territories. For example, here in Queens, if the mayor had been placed here, then we would actually have a tie between the red player and the neutral faction. And all that would mean is that the red player does not gain control of this territory. In this way, neutral figures can be used to block territory acquisition, making them incredibly strong. Players who gained control of territories during this round are considered to have control of that territory now. The controlling player is the one who always has their chit on the top of the stack. So in later rounds, as more chits are put out, as other players begin to gain control of territories, the player on top is always considered to be the controlling player. The reason this is important is because in subsequent rounds, when a thug comes to shake down the front of a business in a territory that is not controlled by them, for example, if blue player here shakes down the cavalry cemetery in Queens, this belongs to the red player, and so the red player can also take the same action that the blue player gained from placing his thug in this territory. In a sense, they both get to shake down the front of the building. It's worth noting that the blue player decides who gets to take this action first. At the end of the game, players will score points based on who controls the most territories. For each territory that you control, you gain $5 towards your total score. The player that wins the $5 is the player with the most chits in the stack. If 2 players are drawn for the same number of chits, is the player who has the one closest to the top out of the drawn players, who breaks the tie. Way before scoring territories and things like that, we're going to have to do the bribery phase. In the bribery phase, players are going to be bribing the allies that have appeared on the bottom of the board here. This represents them paying off city officials, hiring new gangsters for the mob, and other acts like that. Players will bid on ally cards through a secret bidding process in which we take our suitcases, we open them up, we take a certain amount of money that we want to bid, we hide it in the lid of the suitcase, and then when every player has done that, we all reveal how much money we've bid. The player who's made the highest bid gets first choice of the ally card, with players choosing ally cards in descending order, and the player who's made the lowest bid gets no ally card at all. It's worth noting that you can bid 0. If you do bid 0, you can't take an ally card, even if you win. If 2 players have bid the same amount, then the tie is broken by whichever player possesses the first player token. Finally, any players who were successful in their bidding and gained an ally card discard the money back to the supply. Any players, or the player who bid the least and did not get an ally card, puts their money back in their suitcase. It is also perfectly legal to hide job cards in the lid of your suitcase to make it look as though you had made a bid even when you haven't. Any job cards you hide up there, of course, are just added back into your suitcase immediately. Then it's on to the Tribute to the Dawn phase. In the Tribute to the Dawn phase, we look at the hand limit for the round. We discard the number of cards in our hand down to that hand limit. Any money or resource cards that are discarded are returned to their supply piles. Any jobs are put in the discard pile. And any ally cards are discarded back to their respective ally deck. Note that this hand limit will apply to any allies you acquired in the previous bribery step. So if you won a bribe and picked up a card and that's put you over, then you must count that towards your hand total, even though you've just acquired the card. So we've been through all 5 rounds of the game. It's pretty straightforward. Once you get to the end, you do the Entre Acte step, which is sort of a cleanup and resetting of the board. This involves moving on Don Corleone, distributing any new family members that might be made aware. You'll also at this time replace any of the jobs that were used up during the action rounds, and you'll discard any remaining allies and replace them with allies from the next deck. It's worth noting that on the final round, you skip the Tribute to the Bribery step because the players won't have any more chance to use these allies they buy. You'll also discard down to 2 cards. These cards might as well be money because you can't use anything else, but any money you keep in your hand here will actually be added to your final score instead of being kept in your hand as usual. When you get to the end of the game, you might have a board that looks something like this. Every player is going to have a suitcase full of jobs and cards, and you'll be ready to score. The player with the most money is the winner, and there are some bonuses to be worked out. First of all, you'll take any money that you put in your suitcase during the course of the game, and that money will be put directly into your winnings. Then everybody who completed jobs during the course of the game will take out the jobs from their suitcase and we'll look to see who has the most of any given color. There are 4 colors of jobs. There are gray jobs, green jobs, yellow jobs, and blue jobs. Now whoever has completed the most blue jobs will win $5. In the case of a tie, both players gain $5. Whoever's completed the most green job gets $5, most gray jobs gets $5, and most yellow jobs gets $5 as well. That money's just added to your stack here. We'll then look at territories here. Any player who's got the most chits in any given territory will gain $5 additional to just put straight into their winning pool. In the case of a tie, the player on top wins. For example, here in Chelsea, where each player has 1 chit, then the green player will win because they are on the top. Here in Upper East Side, the green player has 2 chits. Even though he's on the bottom, he'll still win, gaining $5 to add to his pool. So I hope that's helped you understand the rules and setup for the Godfather and you feel confident to play yourself. If you do have any doubts, I will be sitting down tomorrow with my friends Oliver and Matthew to play a full game of the Godfather. So I hope you'll come back and join us, and then you can see how it plays firsthand. Matthew's also a Light of Hand on YouTube where he does board game unboxings and stuff like that. So please do also check out his channel. And I hope to see you all tomorrow.